In the Stone Age, a wound was never just a wound. Beneath the skin, unseen armies of bacteria and parasites thrived, waiting for the smallest entry point. Without medicine, even the most innocent scratch became a battlefield. The body's natural defenses fought with fever and swelling, but without antiseptic or antibiotics, the invaders often won. What begins as a red line along the arm could, within days, spread fire through the veins, dragging life toward its quiet extinguishing. Imagine cutting your hand while sharpening flint. The blood clots, the pain dulls, and you think the worst has passed. But by morning, the wound throbs with heat. The edges swell, the skin reddens, and pus seeps slowly from the cut. You cannot work without pain, cannot hold your tools properly, and each attempt at survival reopens the wound. The very hand that once carved shelter and food now betrays you, becoming a vessel for weakness. The body's fever, meant to burn away the sickness, becomes its own torment. Shivering through the night, you lie helpless while predators roam the dark forest. Sweat soaks your skin, and each breath rattles, shallow and uneven. There are no cool cloths, no clean bedsheets, only damp earth and shreds of animal hide. Fever consumes your strength, leaving you delirious, muttering incoherently as your tribe debates whether to wait or move on without you. Water sources, though vital, were treacherous. Streams carried unseen dangers, parasites, giardia, cholera-like sicknesses. A single careless sip could fill the body with cramps, vomiting, and relentless diarrhea. Without medicine, dehydration came swiftly. The stronger you tried to drink, the faster the sickness hollowed you out. You are left curled by the riverbank, lips cracked, body trembling, thirst screaming louder than your fear of the water itself. Even the mouth was a breeding ground for infections. A broken tooth, a cut from a tough root, or meat wedged between the gums became poison to the body. Swelling turned the face grotesque, pain pulsed with every heartbeat, and infection spread downward to the throat. Breathing became difficult, chewing impossible. The simple act of eating, the cornerstone of survival, turned into agony, forcing starvation upon you before the infection finished its work. Animals carried sickness too. The skin of a hunted deer might hide parasites, the meat might fester with unseen bacteria. Eaten raw or poorly cooked, it seeded your stomach with illness. Vomiting racked your body, cramps doubled you over, and exhaustion drained your strength. Without herbs or knowledge, you lay powerless, wishing for the food that betrayed you to somehow undo its curse. Hunger and sickness entwined, leaving no path forward. Skin infections often followed insect bites. Mosquitoes left swollen welts, fleas burrowed, ticks clung until bloated. Each bite introduced something foreign into the blood. At first, only itching, then, fatigue, chills, and fever. The tribe may notice the glassy eyes, the slowing steps, the weakened voice. Soon you could not keep up. The forest floor became your bed, and the buzzing of insects that marked your suffering only invited more of their kind to feast. Smoke, once a comfort against predators, carried dangers for the lungs. Inhaling the thick air inside a poorly ventilated shelter left the chest raw, the throat scorched. Infections bloomed deep in the lungs, coughing fits racked the body, and blood sometimes stained the lips. Pneumonia without medicine was a slow drowning on dry land. Each breath clawed for air, each night stretched into an eternity of gasps, until silence finally claimed you. Children were especially fragile. Their bodies, smaller and untested, succumbed quickly. A scrape on a knee or a bug bite could swell grotesquely overnight. A fever too high left them limp in their mother's arms, skin hot as coals, eyes glazed and unresponsive. The grief of parents in the Stone Age was heavy but familiar. They knew that infection was not rare but expected, and that each child who lived beyond it was a miracle. The tribe's healers, skilled in herbs and rituals, could soothe but rarely cure. They crushed plants into poultices, whispered prayers into the smoke, and placed heated stones near the sick. Sometimes, these treatments slowed the sickness, but more often they merely delayed its progress. Infection did not respect chance or leaf-wrapped remedies, it marched steadily onward, and those who hoped often watched their hope wilt into silence. Even eyes fell prey to infection. A speck of ash or grit inflamed the lids, and pus crusted over them until vision blurred. Blindness crept in, making survival impossible. One could no longer hunt, gather, or even see danger approaching. Without sight, the infected person became a burden to the tribe, dependent on kindness in a world that rarely spared it. The eye, small and overlooked, became the seat of ruin. Think of the blood itself. Once infection reached the bloodstream, there was no turning back. The heart carried it swiftly, delivering poison to every organ. Chills shook the body, confusion clouded the mind, and collapse came suddenly. This silent killer, what we call sepsis today, claimed countless lives in the Stone Age. No one understood it fully, but all feared it, for it took the strong just as swiftly as the weak. Even childbirth was shadowed by infection. Women, already weakened, risked tearing and bleeding. The newborns, fragile and soft, faced the world without defenses. Without clean tools or sterile surroundings, birth often led to fever. Many mothers faded days after bringing life into the world, their bodies consumed by invisible invaders, leaving their infants behind in the arms of grieving kin. An untreated blister from walking barefoot could swell grotesquely. The skin split open, dirt entered, and pus filled the pocket. The foot throbbed with every step, slowing the journey, holding back the hunt. To stop moving was death, yet to keep moving spread the infection deeper. The blister became a cruel trap, small enough to mock, large enough to cripple. Animal scratches too were treacherous. The claws of wildcats, the bites of wolves, carried bacteria deep into tissue. Rabies and other diseases lurked unseen. A survivor of such an attack often lived only briefly, as spasms, fever, and madness followed. The tribe learned to watch for signs, the foaming mouth, the wide eyes, the uncontrollable convulsions, but watching did not mean saving. Waterborne parasites carved their way through intestines. The belly bloated, pain twisted, and waste turned to endless streams of weakness. No herbal tea could halt them, no ritual could expel them. Each day, the body hollowed further until even the bones seemed to ache with emptiness. Infection was not just external, it lived within, gnawing at the core until only a husk remained. Skin sores and boils erupted without warning. They spread across arms, faces, and backs, disfiguring the once healthy. They oozed and cracked, stuck to clothing, and drew flies. Each sore was a beacon of infection's persistence, a reminder that the body was never fully safe. Some healed after weeks of agony, but others spread, covering the body in a tapestry of suffering. Communal living made infection spread like wildfire. One child's cough became the tribe's cough, one person's fever spread in close quarters. Without isolation or medicine, sickness tore through families. Strong hunters fell as swiftly as the young. Infection was not just personal but communal, weakening the tribe until survival itself was threatened. Mental despair always accompanied infection. As the body weakened, the mind dimmed. Hope frayed with each night of fever, each morning of swelling. People grew quiet, gazes distant, as if already turning toward death. The tribe, hardened by repetition, prepared themselves for loss. Infection was not an unusual tragedy but a familiar thief. To live in the Stone Age was to dance with infection daily. The skin, the mouth, the lungs, the blood, all were doors left open to invaders. Without medicine, the body fought alone, and often it lost. Each cut, each bite, each careless sip of water became a gamble with death. Infections did not just escalate, they ruled, reminding every human that survival was fragile, and that nature's smallest forces were often its most merciless. Sanitation is something you take for granted now, a flush of water, a clean towel, soap foaming in your hands. In the Stone Age, none of this existed. Waste was part of the ground you walked on, the rivers you drank from, and the very soil where food grew. Parasites thrived in that environment, tiny creatures you could not see, but whose hunger for your body was endless. Every breath, every sip, every bite carried the chance of infection. Survival was not just against beasts and hunger, but against an invisible army inside the earth. Imagine waking each morning on a bed of hides laid across the dirt. The warmth of your body invites lice and fleas, which crawl across your skin, bite into your scalp, and hide in your clothes. You scratch until your skin breaks, opening tiny wounds. These wounds, left unwashed, fester, turning into sores. Soon, your body itches constantly, keeping you awake at night. The parasites are not content with discomfort, they weaken you slowly, robbing your strength day after day. The rivers and streams, beautiful and glittering in the sun, are treacherous. Animals bathe in them, waste seeps into them, and the earth carries debris downstream. When you kneel to drink, you swallow parasites invisible to the eye. Within days, your stomach cramps, your bowels turn to water, and dehydration steals your strength faster than hunger ever could. You return to the river again and again, trapped in a cruel cycle, because thirst does not wait for healing. Food itself becomes a vessel for parasites. Meat carved from freshly hunted animals carries worms nestled in muscle fibers. Without proper cooking, they pass directly into you. They grow inside your gut, unseen, feeding on the food you eat, sapping your energy. You grow thin even while eating, weak even while nourished. Hunger gnaws at you endlessly, not because food is absent, but because parasites steal what you consume before your body can use it. Bedding and clothing become nests for tiny tormentors. Fleas leap in the furs you sleep under, laying eggs that multiply each night. Lice cling to your hair, laying eggs in tight clusters that never wash away. Without soap, without hot water, you have no defense. Every interaction spreads them further from one person to the next, until the entire tribe is infested. These pests do not kill quickly, but they drain you, robbing sleep, energy, and willpower. Mosquitoes, buzzing in the night air, pierce your skin again and again. Each bite itches at first, but some carry disease, fevers that return in cycles, chills that shake your body, sweats that leave you drenched. Malaria and other illnesses hide within their bites, turning night into torment. You may rise in the morning still alive, but weaker, slower, less able to keep pace. The mosquito's tiny sting echoes longer than a predator's claw. Waste, too, was never truly managed. Without latrines or sewage, human refuse sat near where people lived, contaminating soil and water alike. Flies gathered on it, then landed on food, carrying filth onto every meal. Children crawled through the dirt, their hands coated in invisible bacteria, their mouths inevitably bringing sickness inside. Entire families were weakened, not by predators or famine, but by the invisible spread of their own waste. Open wounds, untreated, attracted flies. The buzzing swarm laid eggs in the flesh, and maggots soon writhed in the skin. The pain was unbearable, the shame suffocating. Infection and parasites were partners, using one another's weaknesses to thrive. What began as a cut soon became a nest for something living, crawling, and feeding on you while you lived. The Stone Age body was never truly its own. Ticks, clinging silently from tall grass, latched onto ankles, thighs, or necks. Their bites went unnoticed at first, but they burrowed deep, feasting on blood. Some carried diseases that stiffened joints, clouded minds, or caused fevers that returned year after year. Pulling them free often left parts of their bodies behind, still embedded, still infecting. You never saw them coming, never knew you had been chosen as their host until the sickness began. Bathing was rare and always risky. Rivers and lakes offered a chance to clean the body, but also opened fresh wounds to parasites lurking in the water. Tiny worms entered through the skin, lodging themselves deep within organs. The relief of cool water quickly soured into illness. To stay dirty was dangerous, but to wash could be fatal. Cleanliness was a paradox with no safe answer. Animals, both hunted and domesticated, added to the spread of parasites. Sleeping near hides, eating from bones, or handling carcasses meant contact with fleas, worms, and bacteria. Even loyal dogs carried parasites that leapt to human skin. The companionship of animals came at a cost, and that cost was constant vulnerability. To live beside them was to accept the silent exchange of sickness. The very soil beneath your feet carried hidden dangers. Walking barefoot, small cuts invited worms to burrow in. Each step pressed eggs deeper into flesh. Your feet swelled, blistered, and bled, making walking painful. Yet walking was life itself, to stop was to starve. The earth gave food and shelter, but it also gave parasites that lived within you until you were no longer strong enough to continue. Cooking fires, smoky and uneven, were never hot enough to kill every parasite in meat. Half-cooked meals, eaten in desperation, often carried disease. Hunger drove you to ignore the risk, but the consequences always came later: stomachs bloated, cramps twisting through the night, children crying in agony while the elders whispered prayers. Food was both salvation and poison, always uncertain. Without soap or disinfectant, hands spread sickness easily. Touching raw meat, then touching your mouth, passed parasites directly. Handling waste, then handling food, brought illness to the whole group. The hands that built tools and carried children were also carriers of sickness. Without washing, the cycle never ended, and the body weakened long before old age. Parasites did more than steal food, they drained spirit. Constant itching, constant pain, and constant weakness eroded hope. Sleep was broken, nights filled with scratching and groaning. Days blurred into fatigue, and soon, despair set in. People whispered that sickness was punishment or curse, for what else could explain the cruelty of invisible tormentors that never rested? Children, once again, bore the heaviest burden. Their small bodies were easy prey. Worms grew inside them until their bellies swelled outward grotesquely, their limbs thinning, their eyes dulling. Parents could only watch, helpless, as children wasted away, their cries weakening each day. Parasites fed without mercy, leaving behind only silence in families already burdened by grief. The tribe itself could be undone by parasites. A sickness carried by one member spread quickly through shared food and bedding. Soon, hunters were too weak to hunt, gatherers too frail to walk. The group staggered, unable to find enough food or water, and predators noticed. Parasites were invisible enemies, yet they destroyed entire bands as efficiently as any beast. Even the mind twisted under their weight. Constant fatigue and malnutrition dulled thought, slowed reactions, and muddled memory. Plans failed, mistakes multiplied, and accidents increased. The parasites did not only consume the body but dimmed the mind, leaving humans shadows of their true selves. Survival required clarity, but parasites took that away with every day they lingered. Herbs provided some defense, but never certainty. Leaves with bitter juices were chewed to soothe the stomach, ashes rubbed on wounds, smoke blown into furs to chase fleas. Sometimes it worked, often it did not. Parasites endured, adapting and returning. Nature offered cures, but never enough to fully banish the hidden armies thriving within and around humans. The Stone Age was not only about hunting and fire, but about endurance against what could not be seen. Sanitation was a luxury not yet discovered, and parasites were rulers of the invisible world. They crept into bodies, weakened tribes, and claimed lives silently, without the drama of predators or storms. Their victory was steady and cruel, a reminder that in a world so raw, even the smallest creatures held the greatest power. And so, to imagine yourself in the Stone Age is to imagine a body never free. Every itch, every cough, every cramp was a warning. The fight was endless, and victory rare. Sanitation was not a word yet born, but its absence defined life. Parasites were everywhere, and their hunger made the Stone Age not only brutal, but unrelenting in ways most modern minds can hardly bear to comprehend. You don't know how to make or repair clothing. At first, it might not seem like such a big deal. After all, people today often think of clothing as optional comfort or even fashion. But in the Stone Age, clothing was not vanity, it was survival. Without the knowledge of how to stitch animal hides together, without the ability to replace worn fur, or to cure skins so they wouldn't rot, you would quickly discover how merciless nature truly was. Nights were cold, mornings wet, afternoons scorching, and your bare skin bore every cruelty. When clothing tore, it wasn't simply an inconvenience. A ripped seam left your body exposed to wind and freezing air. Without even the simplest tool of bone or stone needle, you couldn't mend what was broken. The hide hardened with time, cracking further, becoming useless. Once gone, that garment was lost forever. And then the cold crept in, not like a sudden storm, but like a steady whisper, draining the heat from your bones night after night until weakness overtook you. Your skin, unprotected, became prey to the world. The sun burned during summer, leaving blistered shoulders and peeling flesh. In the rain, water soaked into your skin, chilling you until your teeth chattered and your muscles spasmed uncontrollably. Winter was a death sentence without hides wrapped tight. Even if you huddled near fire, the heat faded once you stepped into open air, and your body could not endure. Clothing was not a luxury, it was a shield. Without it, you were already halfway gone. Parasites took advantage of bare flesh. Without layers to separate you from biting insects, mosquitoes swarmed freely, ticks clung to your skin, and lice made nests in your hair. Each bite left behind more than itching. Many carried fevers, chills, or infections. Scratches turned to sores, and sores became gateways for worse things. Hides offered some relief from this constant assault, but without the skill to replace or repair them, you would live as open prey, gnawed upon by things too small to fight. Clothing also served as armor against the physical world. When you crouched in brush or walked through thick forest, sharp thorns tore skin. When you dragged a carcass home, its bones and teeth scraped you raw. Without hides to soften those blows, your body became riddled with cuts, scratches, and bruises. The earth itself punished you, and without clothing to stand between you and its sharp edges, every task left new scars. Those wounds, untreated, could easily turn to infection. Even warmth from fire could not fully protect you. A fire was fleeting. It roared bright one night and smoldered weak the next morning. Without clothing, you were forced to cling desperately to its heat, never straying far, never venturing out into the world. Your freedom was stolen by the cold, your mobility chained to flame. Fire alone could not wrap around your shoulders while you walked, nor shield your body from icy wind. Without clothing, you were trapped in a shrinking circle of warmth. The skill to tan hides and stitch them into wearable protection was one of humanity's greatest survival secrets. But without that knowledge, even hunting animals meant little. You could kill a deer, but if you didn't know how to scrape away the fat, stretch the skin, and dry it so it wouldn't rot, the hide turned stiff and foul-smelling. It became brittle, crumbling in your hands. What should have been weeks of warmth dissolved into useless scraps. Food alone was not enough, you needed shelter for your body. When storms came, rain soaked you fully. Hides, poorly treated, would collapse into soggy lumps, clinging to your skin like dead weight. Without proper preparation, your clothing was as fragile as leaves in the wind. Soaked hides grew heavy, dragging you down, chilling you further as water drew away body heat. And once soaked, without fire or shelter, they never dried. You walked in misery, your skin rubbing raw against wet fur, your body shivering until exhaustion overtook you. The seasons themselves were enemies without clothing. In spring, the chill of snowmelt still lingered, and frost cut through bare flesh at dawn. In summer, insects feasted upon you, and the sun burned your back until blisters bled. In autumn, rains returned, drenching you day after day, leaving you cold and heavy with water. Winter was unthinkable, snow clung to your skin, your breath froze in the air, and within minutes, you were numb. Clothing meant endurance, but without skill, nature consumed you season by season. Even footwear was a barrier you could not afford to lose. Without sandals or moccasins crafted from hide, your feet bore the full cruelty of the ground. Stones split your soles, thorns pierced deep, and cold froze the flesh until walking became agony. Every step was a risk. Cracks opened in the skin, blood pooled in cuts, and infections spread upward from your feet into your legs. Soon, the very act of movement became a threat to survival, all because you did not know how to fashion a simple shoe. Clothing also held symbolic value. Among early tribes, garments showed status, identity, and belonging. To lack proper clothing marked you as weak, unskilled, perhaps even cursed. You would be seen as someone who could not care for themselves, unable to contribute fully to the group. Isolation was as deadly as exposure, for without allies, your chances of enduring winter or predators dwindled. Knowledge of clothing was not just practical, it was social survival. Sleeping without furs or coverings left nights unbearable. Even with fire, the chill of the earth crept upward into your bones. Stones pressed into your body, the ground sucked warmth away, and frost gathered in your hair. Without something to wrap yourself in, you spent nights in restless shivering, drifting in and out of shallow sleep. Each morning, you woke weaker than the last, already worn down before the day's struggles began. Fatigue slowly became your executioner. Clothing was also protection from your own prey. When skinning animals, hides and bones carried bacteria, blood soaked your body, and sharp claws sometimes cut back. Without clothing to shield you, your bare arms bore every scratch and stain. Each wound, untreated, could fester. Each splash of blood carried unseen dangers. Clothing was the barrier between you and the animals you depended on, saving you from infections that came not from predators, but from your very meals. The act of making clothing was also a test of patience and wisdom. It required skill with tools, an understanding of materials, and the persistence to finish what was necessary. Without that, you were helpless. Imagine trying to thread sinew through a hole in hide without knowing how to sharpen bone into a needle, or trying to knot fibers into thread without watching someone else do it first. You would fumble endlessly, wasting precious resources while your body grew colder by the day. Even when hides lasted, they eventually wore thin. Constant friction from walking, kneeling, or hunting wore holes in fabric. Without knowledge of patching or reinforcing, clothing disintegrated. What once kept you alive betrayed you, piece by piece. The sleeves fell away, the seams split, and your chest was left bare. A single winter was enough to shred poorly made garments into rags. Without skill to repair, the world was always stripping you of your protection. Children, too, suffered if clothing was not provided. Their small bodies could not hold warmth as well as adults, and without soft furs to wrap them, they cried through long cold nights. Parents who lacked the knowledge to make or repair clothing watched helplessly as their children weakened from exposure. A single ripped covering could mean sickness or death. Clothing was not merely personal survival, but the survival of generations. Rain and wind cut deeper than teeth or claws. Predators might take one person at a time, but weather attacked everyone. The tribe depended on clothing to move together, to hunt, to gather, and to migrate. Without clothing, you slowed the group, weakened them, and exposed them to greater risk. The knowledge of making garments was shared not just for comfort, but to ensure no one member became the weak link that endangered all. Bare skin also meant less ability to carry. Clothing offered pockets, belts, straps, ways to transport tools, stones, or food. Without these, your hands bore every burden, leaving you vulnerable if danger struck. Imagine carrying stones in bare arms while a predator lurked nearby. With clothing, you could tie them at your side. Without it, survival became clumsy, your efficiency halved. A lack of clothing knowledge was not just about warmth, but about practicality in every movement. Your dignity eroded as well. To be unclothed among others meant shame, exposure, and vulnerability. Humans instinctively sought covering, not only for protection but for a sense of self. Without it, you felt like prey, raw and unguarded against both nature and your own kind. This psychological toll weakened willpower. In a world where morale often meant survival, the absence of clothing struck at your very spirit. Insects were merciless in warmer months. Without the barrier of hides, swarms descended freely, biting and stinging until your skin burned with welts. Some swarms drove animals mad with pain. Imagine their effect on you. Covered bodies could endure, but bare flesh became raw and bloody under constant attack. The buzzing never stopped, the pain never eased, and your body became a banquet you could not defend. Without the art of clothing, even migration became impossible. Tribes often moved great distances to follow herds or escape storms. Without warm hides, your body could not survive the trek through harsh winds, rain, or snow. You would be left behind, abandoned by necessity, because your body could not endure what others could. The knowledge of clothing was the difference between belonging to a moving people and dying alone in the cold. Finally, the truth is simple. Without clothing, survival in the Stone Age was nearly impossible. Fire alone was fleeting, shelter alone was incomplete. Your body was too fragile, too vulnerable, too easily broken by cold, heat, insects, or wounds. Clothing was the armor humanity invented to endure a world that was never kind. Without the ability to make or repair it, you lived each day exposed, fragile, and slowly unraveling under forces you could not resist. Navigation and finding resources is non-trivial. The modern person thinks of direction as simple, just follow a map, or let a compass needle tell the truth. But in the Stone Age, you had neither. The trees all looked the same, the hills stretched endlessly, and rivers twisted without pattern. Landmarks were fleeting, shadows changed, the sky shifted, animals carved new trails. Without knowledge passed from elders, every step risked losing the way back. Hunger could drive you forward, but without orientation, hunger only pulled you deeper into danger. The sun, the most obvious guide, betrayed the untrained. Yes, it rose in the east and fell in the west, but clouds swallowed it whole, and fog erased it entirely. In dense forest, the canopy swallowed the sky, and you walked under green twilight with no sense of direction. At night, the stars held secrets, patterns etched into the heavens, but you did not know them. To you, they were random lights, dazzling but useless, while the experienced saw roads across the dark. What you thought was steady guidance was only confusion. Water was necessary, yet finding it was no trivial task. Without pipes or taps, you wandered in search of rivers or springs. You might follow animal trails, but those trails often led to stagnant ponds full of parasites. You might dig into damp soil, but without knowing depth or technique, you found only mud. The sound of running water was a blessing, but the stream you discovered might be bitter, salty, or poisoned by unseen decay upstream. To drink was a gamble, and without knowledge, your gamble often cost you dearly. Food was scattered across the landscape, not gathered in tidy stores. Every tree, every bush, every shadow might hide something edible or something fatal. Without knowledge of the region, you could not tell one berry from another. A nut might feed you or paralyze you. Mushrooms tempted with color and scent, but their venom killed slowly, leaving you weak and helpless. The earth provided, yes, but only for those who could interpret its offerings. To the ignorant, it was a forest of lies. Hunting depended on knowing where animals roamed, yet those patterns were not obvious. Herds followed migration, seasons dictated paths, and prey moved in rhythms only the observant learned. A beginner saw emptiness where life thrived. Tracks in mud might fool you, a heavy line you thought was a deer was a boar, and what you thought was a harmless rabbit trail led you to a fox den. Each wrong assumption wasted time and drained strength, for hunger did not pause while you wandered. The terrain itself was an obstacle. Without paths, you trudged through brambles that tore at your legs, waded through streams that numbed your feet, and climbed ridges that stole your breath. A simple journey to find fruit might leave you miles from camp, your bearings lost. The earth offered no gentle road, every direction was resistance. To survive, you needed more than strength, you needed a mental map, one built from experience, memory, and instinct. Without it, each step was a coin toss with your life. Even when you marked your way, nature erased it. Stones toppled, branches snapped under storms, animal hooves covered your footprints. Smoke from your fire rose only so high before the wind scattered it. You thought you had left signs, yet upon return, everything looked foreign, as though the forest had closed behind you. Panic crept in, a deeper enemy than hunger, for once your mind surrendered to fear, you wandered blindly, forgetting even the simple truths you knew. Without navigation, the tribe's survival faltered. People needed to know where to gather nuts, where herds drank, where stones good for tools could be found. This knowledge wasn't written down but passed through memory, story, and teaching. If you lacked it, you could not contribute. Worse, you became a burden someone others had to guide, protect, and feed. To be unable to find your way was not only personal weakness, it endangered the whole group, for every wasted step risked another's life. Even weather turned against you when you lacked skill. Rain washed away familiar scents, fog erased the horizon, and snow buried every landmark in a white abyss. Rivers swelled until crossings vanished. What you thought was a path became a trap of mud or ice. The sky itself confused you, storms shifted winds, throwing off the sense of direction you thought you felt. Every natural change became a trickster, and you, without training, fell for every deception. The animal world offered both hints and dangers. Birds circled where carcasses lay, leading you to food or to predators already feeding. Deer. Trails cut through the undergrowth, but following them blindly could place you before wolves that hunted the same deer. Even insects signaled water or fruit, yet if you did not know which swarm led to sweetness and which to rot, you wasted time or fell ill. To use animals as guides required deep knowledge. Without it, you misread every sign. The land itself held memory, but only for those who listened. Certain trees grew only near water, certain flowers only in sunlight, certain mosses only on the shaded side of bark. These clues formed a language older than speech, and tribes learned to read it fluently. But you, stepping fresh into the Stone Age, were illiterate in that tongue. You walked past signs that could have saved you, moss pointing north, roots pointing to water, clouds signaling rain. The world whispered, but you did not understand. Distance was deceptive in untamed landscapes. A mountain looked close but took days to reach. A stream's echo carried farther than its water flowed. Valleys that seemed shallow turned to ravines. Without experience, you misjudged everything, exhausting yourself on false journeys, chasing illusions, and wasting energy you could not afford. Each miscalculation stole food, water, and warmth. In the Stone Age, energy was life, and to spend it unwisely was fatal. Returning to camp was often the hardest part. In your hunger and desperation, you wandered farther than you realized. The world was a maze without walls, repeating its trees, its hills, its silence. Turning back, you found nothing familiar. Every tree looked like another, every shadow seemed different, and you could not tell if you were closer or farther. Panic quickened your pace, and soon exhaustion made decisions for you. In those moments, many perished within sight of safety. Seasonal changes transformed the land beyond recognition. A meadow full of wildflowers in spring became a barren field in winter. A riverbed dried into cracked earth in summer, only to flood into raging currents in autumn. What was once a reliable path vanished under snow, or was swallowed by growing roots and vines. Without the long memory of elders, you could not predict these shifts. To you, the land was always new, always strange, and never truly known. Even the sky, which seems eternal, offered deception. Clouds formed shapes you misread, winds carried scents from far-off places, and storms changed their paths. You thought you understood the weather, but its rhythm was more intricate than your modern eyes could grasp. The elders knew when to move, when to stay, when to risk crossing rivers, and when to wait. Without such wisdom, you acted rashly, and nature punished rashness with cruelty. Navigation was not just about finding resources, but about survival during emergencies. When predators chased, you needed to know the quickest climb, the narrowest ravine, the safe cave. When sickness struck, you needed to know where healing herbs grew. When fire caught, you needed to know the river's direction. Without this knowledge, emergencies became death sentences. You were not just slow, you were blind in a world that demanded vision. The body itself betrayed the ignorant traveler. Hunger muddled your mind, thirst clouded judgment, and fatigue slowed your pace. When your strength waned, you leaned on instinct, but instinct alone was too shallow. The experienced could read signs even in exhaustion, but you staggered aimlessly, trusting guesses. Each wrong turn deepened your weakness, until finally, the land consumed you without effort. Survival required not only knowledge but the discipline to use it even while starving. The forest was a labyrinth of sound. Branches snapped, rivers roared, birds called, but all these noises overlapped. Without skill, you could not distinguish the distant fall of water from the trickle of a nearby stream. You could not separate the echo of a predator from the cry of prey. Sound led you in circles, spinning you like prey caught in confusion. Only with trained ears could you hear truth. To you, every noise was a distraction, and each distraction stole another hour. The night was the worst time to lose direction. Darkness erased all landmarks, leaving only vague silhouettes. Fire could guide you back, but only if you had kept it alive, and flames died quickly without fuel. In blackness, the ground became uneven, roots tripped you, shadows startled you. Without navigation skills, you walked in circles until exhaustion forced you to the ground. Night was not just an obstacle, it was a trap. Even rivers, which seem like perfect guides, carried dangers. To follow them meant wading through mud, risking predators that lurked nearby, or losing your path when they branched into deltas. Rivers flooded without warning, cutting off return. They drew you along, yes, but often farther than you intended, and without skill, you could not navigate their branching networks. A guide for some became a snare for others. Time itself worked against you. Every hour spent lost was an hour without food or water. Every wrong turn pushed you closer to nightfall. Resources dwindled as panic grew. Even if you finally stumbled upon a source, you had already wasted energy you could not replace. By the time you found food, your body was too weak to hunt it. By the time you found water, your hands shook too violently to scoop it. Navigation was not optional, it was the first step of every survival. Without reliable navigation, your mind became the cruelest enemy. Doubt whispered that you were circling, fear told you predators lurked nearby, exhaustion convinced you to give up. The wilderness broke not only the body but the spirit. Tribes survived because they shared knowledge, held stories of the land, remembered the paths of ancestors. Alone and ignorant, you lost hope before you lost life. In the Stone Age, not knowing where to go was as deadly as the bite of a wolf. And in the end, this truth remains: the earth was both giver and taker, but it demanded respect. Without maps, compasses, or guides, survival depended on reading signs written into soil, sky, and stone. If you lacked that skill, the world swallowed you whole. Navigation was not merely a skill of movement, it was the lifeline connecting every act of survival. Without it, you were lost long before you realized it. Social dynamics could turn hostile. Imagine you stumble into a small Stone Age group, hoping for protection, food, and companionship. At first, the firelight feels welcoming, faces glance at you with curiosity rather than aggression. But trust was not automatic in such a harsh world. To these people, every outsider was a possible thief, a bringer of disease, or a rival for limited resources. You were judged by what you could contribute, not by words alone. And without proven skills, suspicion lingered in every glance. Resources shaped every interaction. A single extra mouth could mean less meat for children, less fur for warmth, less water from a shrinking stream. Sharing was not charity, it was a gamble. If you could not hunt, craft, or heal, then you were seen as dead weight. Resentment grew quickly, whispered at night, spoken in tones you might not understand but could feel. Even your presence near the fire could make them uneasy, for warmth itself was precious. Survival left little room for pity. Hierarchy defined order within the group. Elders held wisdom, hunters commanded respect, gatherers contributed stability. If you challenged this balance unknowingly by speaking out of turn, or touching something reserved, you risked angering the core of the group. Authority was enforced not by laws, but by instinct and tradition. A misplaced gesture could mark you as arrogant, disruptive, or disrespectful. In a world where unity meant survival, those who disrupted order were swiftly dealt with. Violence simmered beneath cooperation. When hunger grew sharp and game was scarce, tempers flared. Rivalries emerged between hunters, envy between families, disputes over sleeping space or mating rights. A stranger was most vulnerable during these tensions. Blame was easily shifted onto you, the outsider, the one with no kin ties. A single missing scrap of food could become your death sentence, whether you had taken it or not. Suspicion needed only the faintest spark to ignite. Kinship bonds held power stronger than reason. Bloodlines formed the web of trust, and without such ties, you were peripheral, fragile, expendable. Tribes acted first to protect their own, brother before friend, cousin before stranger. If resources dwindled, you would be the first to be denied, the first to be cast out. Even if you shared their fire for a time, your lack of kinship placed you at the very edge of their circle, a heartbeat away from rejection. Jealousy poisoned trust. If you were perceived as too close to someone's mate, even by accident, tension grew. If you appeared too strong or too clever, others feared you might challenge the leader. If you appeared too weak, you were despised as a burden. Balance was delicate, and an outsider disrupted it simply by existing. Every gesture, every glance, carried weight, and your ignorance of their unspoken rules only made you more dangerous in their eyes. Punishment was swift. There were no courts, no trials, only immediate responses. Theft was met with exile, betrayal with violence. A tribe could not afford hesitation. Indecision risked collapse. If you were caught breaking trust, even unknowingly, they might cast you out into the night. And exile in the Stone Age was nearly always a death sentence, for alone you faced predators, hunger, and cold without the protection of numbers. Justice was harsh because survival demanded it. Dominance mattered. The leader, whether by strength or wisdom, had to command authority. If you challenged them, even by accident, standing too tall, taking too much space, questioning their choices, you risked being seen as a rival. Rivals were not tolerated. Challenges ended in bloody contests, and the loser often did not survive. Leadership was not symbolic, it was enforced by tooth and fist. And your ignorance of these dynamics could cost you dearly. Communication itself was a barrier. Their language was not yours. Gestures you meant as harmless might be read as insult. A smile might appear as a grimace, a wave as aggression. Misunderstanding multiplied tension, making you appear strange, unpredictable, and unsafe. Where trust was already thin, your inability to blend seamlessly into their rhythm of speech and motion marked you as other. In a world of us versus them, otherness was dangerous. Even generosity could betray you. If you offered food, they might suspect you were hiding more. If you gave too freely, you could be seen as weak, easily taken advantage of. If you refused to share, you were selfish, hoarding what could belong to the group. There was no safe path without deep cultural knowledge. What seemed kind in your eyes could provoke resentment in theirs, because every act was measured against survival's unforgiving scale. Children altered dynamics. If you accidentally frightened one, or took something they considered theirs, the tribe turned instantly against you. Children were the tribe's future, its continuation, and their safety outweighed all else. To threaten them, even unknowingly, made you an enemy beyond forgiveness. You would be driven away, if not struck down outright, because no group risked its future for the comfort of an outsider. The smallest misstep could doom you. Mating rights were a constant undercurrent. Every adult had stakes in the balance of who partnered with whom. To glance too long at another's mate, to laugh too freely with them, even to sit too close, such things sowed anger. In small groups, jealousy was fire in dry grass, spreading swiftly. Outsiders were watched most closely, for they had no claim, no bond, yet might disrupt delicate alliances. Even your presence upset what was carefully maintained. Scarcity of resources deepened hostility. During abundance, a group might tolerate you, even welcome you. But when food ran thin or cold pressed hard, tolerance vanished. Outsiders became the first target, the expendable scapegoat, the offering to fear. It mattered little how long you had stayed with them. When survival was threatened, they closed ranks, and you were cast out. What felt like community one day turned into hostility the next, as survival demanded sacrifice. Disputes within the group could entangle you. Even if you stayed quiet, one side might assume your support, the other your opposition. Silence did not free you from conflict, it implicated you. If you attempted to mediate, you risked overstepping, for only trusted voices could ease disputes. Outsiders who meddled were often punished harshly, for they disturbed fragile balances they could not understand. Sometimes neutrality was as dangerous as defiance. Food distribution was ritualized, and errors in this ritual sparked outrage. Hunters often ate first, elders had priority, children were protected. If you reached too soon for meat, if you touched what was not yet given, you offended the unspoken law. Even small acts were magnified in the firelit circle. A single mistake revealed ignorance, and ignorance was intolerable, for it suggested you could not be trusted with greater responsibilities. Accusations required no proof. Fear and suspicion carried weight enough. If food went missing, if a tool broke, if a child cried, the outsider was blamed. Protests meant little, for in their eyes, you had no credibility. The group's safety outweighed your innocence. To be accused was to be marked, and once marked, you were seldom forgiven. In such a world, survival was tied not to truth but to belonging. Without belonging, you were always one mistake away from doom. Even alliances within the group were precarious. People who appeared friendly might turn against you if it served their interest. A rival within the group could point fingers, whisper doubts, and soon you would be isolated, surrounded by cold stares. You had no kin to defend you, no one to vouch for your worth. Alone among many, you were always at the mercy of shifting loyalties, with no anchor to keep you safe. The fire itself symbolized community, and seating around it revealed status. If you sat too near the center, you seemed presumptuous. Too far, you seemed weak. Placement was earned, not chosen. A newcomer had no place but the outer edge, and even then, only if permitted. If you misunderstood this silent hierarchy, you insulted everyone at once. In silence, glances sharpened, and your fate could be sealed by where you chose to rest your weary body. Dreams of harmony ignored the constant edge of competition. Stone Age life was not a gentle commune, it was a balance of cooperation and rivalry. Every resource, every relationship, every word was weighed. If you entered such a world with naive expectations of kindness, you would be shattered by its harshness. People were capable of warmth, yes, but warmth was fragile, easily extinguished when survival pressed hard. Trust was firewood, and there was never enough. Exile was the most common solution. Rather than bloodshed, the group might simply push you out, leaving you to wander alone. They did not need to kill you directly, for the world outside their fire was already waiting to finish the task. Predators, cold, hunger, all were executioners. Exile allowed the group to protect itself without dirtying hands. And once cast out, no other tribe would welcome you, for word traveled, and your reputation followed. Fear of betrayal kept groups tight. If you hinted at leaving, even innocently, they feared you might reveal secrets to rivals. Knowledge of hunting grounds, shelters, or migration patterns was too valuable. Those who knew such things were either bound tightly to the group or silenced forever. Outsiders carried risk, and so suspicion was natural. You, in your ignorance, underestimated how dangerous knowledge itself could be in a world of scarce survival. At times, groups split. Disputes too large shattered communities into fragments. In those moments, violence could erupt, and as an outsider, you were most likely to be caught between factions. Neither side trusted you, and both saw you as expendable. Where others had kin to shield them, you had none. In the chaos, you could be struck down without notice, your death a footnote in their greater conflict. To belong was to be protected. To be other was to be forgotten. Even within apparent calm, tension hummed like a hidden drum. Laughter around the fire masked rivalry, silence at night hid whispered plots. Survival bred not just cooperation, but suspicion, envy, and fear. You, entering as a stranger, were a disruption in their fragile order. And disruption was rarely tolerated long. In such a world, you would quickly discover that predators were not only outside the firelight, but also sitting beside you, cloaked in human form. Thus, the greatest threat was not always the cold, or hunger, or beasts of the night. It was the people themselves, their mistrust, their needs, their rivalries. In the Stone Age, social survival was as critical as physical survival. And without the knowledge of unspoken rules, without kinship ties to shield you, the very group you hoped would protect you could instead become the force that ended you. Physical stamina is brutally different. Modern life has softened the edges of what our bodies were once required to endure. In the Stone Age, daily existence demanded endurance. Most of us cannot imagine hours of walking on uneven ground, carrying heavy loads of gathered wood or water, hunting across vast terrain, climbing, crouching, lifting, all under an unrelenting sky. There was no chair to rest on, no elevator, no car to shorten distances. Muscles had to become ropes, lungs had to expand like bellows, and bones had to harden against strain. Survival was movement, endless and merciless. Every step was work, and every moment of work burned precious calories. Food was scarce, yet you needed it constantly to fuel the exertion of living. Imagine waking already hungry, then having to walk miles barefoot through sharp stones and thorny undergrowth simply to find edible plants or to check traps. By the time you returned, if you returned, you had already expended more energy than you gained. There was no surplus, the body was constantly at the brink, pulled taut between starvation and exhaustion. Carrying loads was unavoidable. Bundles of sticks for fire, skins filled with water, baskets of roots or fruit, they all had to be hauled back to camp. Without beasts of burden or wheels, the human body was the sole engine of transport. Shoulders ached, hands split, backs strained under the ceaseless demand. And you had no choice but to bear it, for failure to bring weight home meant the group went without warmth, without sustenance, without life. Even children carried their share as soon as they could stand. Endurance was not just about strength, it was about repetition without rest. There was no weekend, no pause, no extended recovery time. The demands came every dawn and pressed until dusk, and then into night if danger called. The body was rarely allowed to heal fully. Wounds festered under constant movement, blisters tore open again and again, muscles remained sore with no balm to soothe them. To be alive meant to keep going, regardless of pain, because to stop was to risk death. Running was woven into survival. Hunts often required persistence chasing, following prey for hours until it collapsed from exhaustion. Predators were outpaced not by speed but by the sheer ability of humans to keep going, to run and walk and run again under a burning sun. Yet for the untrained body, even a mile can feel unbearable. Imagine being forced into such relentless pursuit without conditioning, your legs buckling, your breath ragged, while others pressed forward without hesitation. Stamina was not optional, because threats did not wait. A predator's sudden approach required you to sprint for safety, to climb a tree, to leap across terrain without pause. You could not reason with fatigue, you either had the reserves to act or you perished. Modern exhaustion, the kind felt after a long day at work, was pale compared to the Stone Age exhaustion of outrunning a lion with empty lungs and trembling muscles, driven only by the terror of claws at your back. Cold sapped energy just as mercilessly as exertion. Without insulated clothing or heated rooms, the body spent enormous reserves merely to stay warm. Shivering, clenching muscles, huddling tight, these drained strength hour by hour. Hunger worsened it, because a starved body could not produce enough heat. Fat reserves, lean muscle, stamina itself, all were steadily eroded by exposure. To survive required not only endurance in motion, but endurance in stillness, resisting the freeze. Terrain was an enemy in itself. Mountains carved by stone, rivers without bridges, marshes that clutched at your legs, every journey drained you. A short walk might turn into an odyssey as you climbed, slipped, or detoured around hazards. Each step punished your feet, tore your skin, and strained your core. The ground was never smooth, never forgiving. Even resting places were rocks and roots, leaving you bruised and sore by morning, forced to rise and walk again. Hunger deepened fatigue into despair. A weakened body could not muster the strength needed, and a weakened mind faltered too. Stamina was more than muscle, it was spirit enduring hunger pangs, dry throats, dizzy spells. Imagine walking for hours while your body screamed for food you did not have, your vision blurred, your head heavy. Yet still you had to continue, because to stop meant no water, no firewood, no survival. Fatigue became an enemy within. Everyday tasks demanded energy modern people rarely use. Grinding seeds into meal, scraping hides, shaping stone, these were repetitive, draining motions that lasted hours. Fingers cramped, wrists ached, backs tightened into knots. And yet they were done daily, without pause, because neglect meant no food, no clothing, no tools. Even work at the fire was exhausting. Sparks stung your skin, smoke clawed your lungs, heat dried your throat, yet the labor could not be abandoned. Sleep offered little recovery. Hard ground left muscles stiff, parasites gnawed, cold seeped into bones. Night was not restorative, it was simply a pause in motion. At dawn, fatigue was still there, waiting like a second skin. There were no soft mattresses, no supportive pillows, only aching bodies forced upright again to walk, lift, grind, and carry. The cycle of exertion never ended, leaving every step heavier than the last, yet still demanded by necessity. Water itself weighed survival down. It had to be gathered, hauled, stored in skins. Carrying enough for a group required endless trips. Rivers and streams were often distant, forcing long walks over treacherous ground with sloshing weight at your side. Each trip left arms trembling, backs aching, shoulders raw. But without it, dehydration set in quickly, sapping stamina further, creating a downward spiral where exhaustion fed exhaustion. Climbing trees or rocks for food was common. Fruits, nuts, or honey often hid in dangerous heights. Scaling trunks tore at hands, strained calves, burned lungs. Falling was a constant risk, yet hunger demanded the climb. The act itself drained strength even when successful, and bruises or wounds from slips further weakened stamina. A single climb could cost more than the calories gained from the food, but there was no choice. Survival meant gambling strength against reward. Injuries worsened the drain. A sprained ankle did not excuse you from walking, it forced you to limp for miles. A cut hand did not free you from work, it forced you to labor through pain. Every injury siphoned stamina faster, leaving you trembling and weary by midday. Yet others could not always carry your burden. Everyone had their own to bear. The injured were expected to keep up, or risk being left behind. Pain was a tax, merciless and unrelenting. Weather punished stamina with no mercy. Heat boiled sweat from the body, leaving you dehydrated, dizzy, and weak. Cold tightened muscles into knots, making every motion slow and clumsy. Rain soaked hides, made firewood heavy, and chilled you to the bone. Storms forced you to huddle under makeshift cover, wasting strength fighting the elements instead of resting. No climate control, no shelter from extremes, only stamina measured against the sky's moods. Children were not exempt from stamina's demand. From a young age, they walked long distances, carried small loads, joined in labor. Childhood was no shield, it was training. Weakness was not coddled, it was burned away by necessity. If you, a modern person, were to collapse under exhaustion, even a child of their world might glance at you with impatience, accustomed already to a life of endless exertion. Stamina was not optional, it was cultivated from birth. Aging drained stamina in merciless ways. Elders endured with knowledge and skill, but their bodies no longer kept pace. For them, every walk, every lift, was heavier than before. Yet they still contributed, for idleness was death. The group could not carry someone who gave nothing back. Stamina's decline was a slow sentence, endured with dignity or bitterness, until the body could no longer move fast enough to survive. Old age was not cushioned, it was endured to the limit. Pregnancy demanded stamina doubled. Expectant mothers carried not only the weight of their unborn but still worked, gathered, walked, and endured. Childbirth itself was the ultimate test, draining reserves of strength, leaving bodies exhausted and vulnerable. Yet even afterward, they could not rest fully. Infants needed carrying, nursing, protection, all tasks requiring endless energy. Motherhood was labor atop labor, stamina stretched to breaking, yet born as part of survival. Hunting drained stamina mercilessly. Hours of tracking, sudden bursts of running, heavy throws of spears all wore the body raw. Even after a successful kill, the animal's weight had to be hauled, butchered, transported. Fatigue built like fire in the muscles, but the work continued until every scrap was secured. A single hunt could burn more energy than several days of eating provided. Victory itself carried the weight of exhaustion. Disease and weakness stole stamina quietly. Fevers left bodies trembling, coughs racked lungs, parasites drained strength day after day. Illness did not excuse you from survival's tasks. You still had to move, fetch, contribute. The body's reserves dwindled faster under sickness, leaving you hollow, struggling to keep pace. Illness turned every step into labor, every breath into effort, but rest was impossible when the group needed you. The mind suffered alongside the body. Fatigue clouded judgment, slowed reaction, dulled awareness. A tired hunter might miss signs of prey, a weary gatherer might mistake a poisonous plant for food. Mistakes born of exhaustion were deadly. Stamina was not simply fuel for muscles, it was clarity for survival. To falter mentally because of weariness was as dangerous as faltering physically. Both carried the price of death. Comparison with modern stamina is stark. A person today, softened by comfort, might struggle after a single day of Stone Age exertion. Muscles would fail, lungs would seize, blisters would form, and exhaustion would collapse them long before tasks were finished. Yet for our ancestors, that was only the beginning of life. They endured day after day, shaping bodies into tools of survival, hardening themselves through necessity. What would break us was merely their routine. Injury or fatigue often separated survivors from the dead. Predators, hunger, cold all could be outrun or endured only if stamina held. The weak fell first, lagging behind, unable to keep pace. A stumble during pursuit, a collapse from weariness, these ended lives swiftly. Stamina was not only an advantage, it was a shield, the line between life and death, tested anew every day without mercy or reprieve. To imagine yourself in such a world is to feel the weight of constant demand pressing on body and spirit alike. There was no end, no reprieve, no comfort. Stamina was not trained for sport or health, it was survival's foundation, hammered into every bone and muscle. And without it, no fire, no shelter, no companionship could save you. Life itself was measured in steps, in breath, in the endurance to keep moving long after you had nothing left to give. Weather can flip from bearable to deadly. One moment the sky above you feels kind, a mild sun warming your skin, a soft breeze carrying scents of earth and wildflowers. But in the Stone Age, this comfort was never a guarantee. The same sky could turn on you without warning, thick clouds forming like bruises across the horizon, wind sharpening into a knife's edge. You had no walls, no roof of stone or wood, only the sky itself, and when it shifted, your survival shifted with it. What was pleasant an hour ago could become a death sentence by nightfall. Rain was never a gentle, welcome drizzle. It was icy needles, soaking through hides and furs, clinging to your skin until it felt as though the cold had burrowed inside your bones. Without fireproof shelters, without waterproof coverings, you stayed wet. And wet meant freezing, even when the air was not freezing itself. Hypothermia crept in slowly, disguised as shivering at first, then growing into clumsy hands, stumbling legs, thoughts clouded until you no longer knew how to seek safety. Rain that promised water for drinking also threatened to steal life. Storms rolled in with violence, thunder crashing across the land, lightning splitting the darkness. With no knowledge of where strikes might fall, every tree became a spear above you, every open field a deadly invitation. Wind bent branches until they cracked like whips, sending splinters flying. Shelters hastily built from leaves and sticks collapsed under the weight of torrents, leaving you exposed. In those hours, the world itself seemed to roar its indifference, and you were a small, shaking figure with no protection beyond hope. Heat was no less brutal. The sun, a golden orb at dawn, could by noon feel like a merciless hammer beating down on your head. Without shade, your skin burned, blistered, peeled, leaving you vulnerable to infection. Sweat poured out, carrying salt and moisture, until dehydration hollowed you from within. Lips cracked, tongues swelled, vision shimmered with false images of water that was never there. You could try to rest in shade, but shade was not always near, and the hunt, the search for food, did not pause for mercy. Cold, in its many cruel forms, tested you endlessly. Frost stiffened your limbs, made your breath sting in your chest, and turned the ground beneath your feet into a jagged mirror of ice. Without wool, without thick coats, without heated rooms, you had only thin hides, often damp, rarely enough. Your body burned precious calories to keep warm, and once those reserves dwindled, shivering was no longer enough. Fingers blackened, toes stiffened, and soon parts of you could die before you did. The cold did not strike fast, it hollowed you slowly. Winds carved across plains and mountains, sharp as blades. They carried sand that scoured skin raw, dust that filled lungs with grit, or icy drafts that slipped through furs as though they weren't even there. Shelter could not always be found, and when it was, it often only dulled the edge, never erased it. To walk against a gale was to fight with every muscle, feeling as though the sky itself had chosen to oppose you. Fatigue doubled under such assault, draining your strength before your tasks were even begun. Seasons came with their own burdens. Summer baked the land, water sources drying into cracked beds, prey animals retreating into shade and scarcity. Winter blanketed the earth in snow, burying food, freezing rivers, and cloaking the world in silence where every step was a battle. Spring, which might seem kinder, brought floods as ice melted, turning paths into rivers and rivers into monsters. Autumns. Storms stripped trees bare, leaving little to gather. There was never a truly safe season, only different forms of hardship. Floodwaters swallowed camps without mercy. Rivers that seemed gentle in the morning swelled with sudden rain, rising until they consumed banks, trees, and shelters. You could be forced to flee in panic, possessions swept away, fire extinguished, tribe scattered. In the chaos, even strong swimmers were helpless against the pull of currents, dragged beneath by debris or exhaustion. Floods were not simply water, they were destruction, sudden and absolute, reminders that Earth itself could turn against you. Snowstorms descended like a curtain of white death. Vision vanished in the whirl of flakes, paths disappeared, and every landmark was erased. Without tools of navigation, you could wander in circles, disoriented until your strength gave out. Snow piled high over shelters, sealing you in, cutting off air, or collapsing roofs under its weight. Every breath was knives, every step a drain on energy as legs sank deeper. In snowstorms, even time betrayed you, day and night blending into endless, blinding cold. Lightning was a terror beyond comprehension. Strikes lit the world in blinding flashes, burning trees to ash, splitting stone, setting forests aflame. The roar followed with a force that rattled bones. For Stone Age people, it was not science but the wrath of the skies, unstoppable and indiscriminate. To be caught in an open field during such a storm was to stand naked before death itself, with no chance of predicting where the next bolt might fall. Even mild weather could twist unexpectedly. A breeze that cooled your skin could swell into gusts that toppled trees. Clouds that promised shade could thicken into storms by dusk. The absence of meteorology meant you were always guessing, always gambling on the sky's mood. What you trusted in the morning could betray you by afternoon, and you had only instinct and memory to guide you. Wrong guesses were paid in blood, bone, and exhaustion. Hail struck with sudden violence. Small stones of ice pelted from the sky, stinging skin, bruising flesh, shredding leaves. Larger hail could crack skulls, break bones, or kill outright. There was no protection but to cower beneath what shelter you had, praying it held. Afterward, the land was often ruined, plants stripped, animals killed or driven off, food sources lost. Hail was a weapon hurled from the heavens, leaving survivors battered and hungry in its wake. The danger was not always in extremes, it was also in the pace of change. A clear sky could darken in minutes, wind rising, air shifting. You had no forecasts, no warnings, only instincts honed by generations. But instinct could fail, and when it did, you were left exposed. One misjudged journey could mean being caught in a storm too far from shelter, forced to endure with nothing but your body against nature's fury. Many lives ended not in battles, but in weather's sudden betrayal. Fire, though vital, was vulnerable. Rain soaked wood until it was useless, storms drowned flames, winds scattered sparks until they died or burned uncontrollably. Without fire, you lost warmth, cooking, and protection from beasts. A single night without it in cold weather could weaken or kill you. The elements did not only attack directly, they stole your tools for survival, leaving you defenseless against hunger, predators, and darkness itself. Sunburn and heatstroke were silent killers. The sun was not always kind, and shade was not always accessible. Skin blistered, peeled, and cracked under relentless rays. Prolonged exposure cooked you from within, making you dizzy, nauseous, delirious. You might stumble, collapse, and never rise again. In modern life, such dangers are cushioned by clothing, sunscreen, or retreat indoors. In the Stone Age, there was only endurance, and endurance sometimes was not enough. Earthquakes, though less frequent, were pure chaos. The ground itself betrayed you, trembling, splitting, toppling boulders and trees. Caves that once sheltered became tombs as ceilings collapsed. Rivers shifted course, floods rose, fires broke out. For Stone Age humans, the earth was supposed to be solid, unshakable. When it moved, when it devoured, it shattered both body and belief, leaving survivors shaken not just in flesh but in faith in the ground beneath their feet. Weather also manipulated prey and predators. Animals vanished into deep forests during storms, leaving you without food. Predators prowled after floods or droughts, desperate and bold. Some beasts moved into human spaces, seeking the same scarce shelter. Weather did not only harm directly, it changed the balance of survival itself, shifting dangers in unseen ways, forcing you to adapt instantly or perish. Heat waves tested patience and stamina alike. Rivers dried, soil cracked, plants withered, prey thinned. Your tongue thickened, your sweat ceased, your mind clouded. Even nights offered no relief, the air heavy and stifling, leaving sleep impossible. Each sunrise brought more fatigue, more thirst, and more despair. The land itself seemed to conspire, baking your spirit until even moving became unbearable. Weather did not need to kill you swiftly, it could grind you down day by day. Fog, dense and suffocating, turned the world into blindness. Paths vanished, predators stalked unseen, cliffs and rivers lurked silently nearby. You moved slower, tense, aware that a single misstep could be fatal. Sounds distorted, footsteps echoed strangely, making it impossible to tell if danger was near. Fog disoriented you, cut you off from companions, and turned the world into a maze. A misjudged direction could leave you wandering into peril you never saw coming. The psychological toll was immense. Weather was relentless, unpredictable, larger than you, indifferent to your needs. Every change in the sky was a potential threat, every season a trial. Fear became part of daily thought. Would the sun scorch? Would the storm drown? Would the frost devour? The mind, strained by constant vigilance, weakened under the weight of uncertainty. Even when the sky was calm, its betrayal was always expected. Storm surges and coastal dangers tested those near the sea. Calm waters could rise into violent waves, sweeping away camps set near the shore. Saltwater poisoned supplies, drowned fires, soaked hides until they rotted. Fishermen or gatherers caught in the tide were dragged under without chance of rescue. The ocean, vast and unknowable, was a gift of food one day and a grave the next, its moods as swift and deadly as the storms above. Tornadoes, though rare, were monsters of raw chaos. Whirling columns of wind ripped trees from earth, tossed stones like toys, shredded shelters in moments. To witness one was to see the sky descend to earth in fury, its power beyond anything human hands could counter. The only defense was distance and luck, and neither could always be counted upon. Afterward, the land lay scarred, survival made harder by destruction. Weather shaped migration. Tribes followed herds, rivers, and seasons, but weather dictated when to leave, where to settle, how long to stay. Too much rain drove you away, too little forced you onward. Cold winters compelled you south, harsh summers north. Movement was endless, exhausting, dictated by the sky. You were never fully settled, never free of the next shift, always pushed by the hand of weather's cruelty. The unpredictability itself was the final cruelty. Unlike predators, you could not fight weather. Unlike hunger, you could not always plan against it. Weather was beyond control, beyond reason, beyond bargaining. It was a reminder that in the Stone Age, you lived not as master of the world but as its fragile tenant, at the mercy of forces vast and indifferent. To endure was to accept that the sky's kindness was fleeting, and its fury ever near. And so, the Stone Age sky was both life-giver and life-taker, a dual force that sustained and destroyed in equal measure. To wake under it was to gamble with its moods, knowing a single shift could undo all your efforts, all your hopes, all your fragile safety. Weather did not need malice to kill, it only needed to be itself, vast and untamed, and you were small beneath it, clinging desperately to the thin thread of survival it allowed. The moment the sun dips below the horizon, the Stone Age transforms into a world of uncertainty, the air growing colder and the shadows lengthening into shapes that stir unease in the mind. Darkness is not simply an absence of light, it is a cloak that magnifies every sound, every rustle, every imagined presence lurking just beyond the circle of vision. Without electricity, without lamps or glowing screens, the night is not gentle but oppressive, pressing down on you with a weight that demands constant vigilance. The silence is not stillness, it is alive with the subtle whispers of creatures that claim the dark as their domain. Your meager fire is both comfort and curse, providing fragile warmth while betraying your position to any who might be watching from the shadows. Flames crackle, their flickering light carving out temporary sanctuaries against the dark, yet their glow is small compared to the vast blackness stretching around you. With every snap of a twig, your heart leaps, uncertain if the sound belongs to a harmless rodent or the paw of something larger, hungrier, and far more dangerous. In such conditions, sleep becomes nearly impossible, for to close your eyes is to surrender to whatever prowls unseen. The darkness does not simply challenge the body, it fractures the mind. Human imagination, untethered by clear sight, spins predators into every corner. The ordinary shifting of wind through branches becomes the breath of a beast. The faintest echo of distant howls sends your thoughts spiraling into fear of wolves, hyenas, or worse. Night is no longer a neutral backdrop, it is a battlefield of perception, where your mind, strained and exhausted, turns traitor against your fragile courage. Survival demands not just strength, but an ability to endure the psychological weight of endless uncertainty. Without the comforts of modern civilization, the Stone Age night strips away illusions of safety. No glowing window lights mark human presence. No walls insulate against sound. You sit vulnerable, exposed to every element and threat, wrapped only in whatever crude covering you've managed to fashion. The cold bites with increasing severity, the damp soil leaching warmth from your body, while insects probe exposed skin without mercy. The elements and the unseen creatures beyond the fire's glow form a coalition, ensuring that darkness is not rest but torment. Predators, well attuned to the night, thrive where you falter. Their eyes, evolved to pierce the shadows, give them command of the terrain while you stumble blind. To them, you are not merely another creature, you are an unfamiliar, vulnerable being that moves awkwardly through their hunting grounds. Every sound you make, every hesitant step, becomes a beacon, announcing your weakness. It is in the night that the balance of power tips most heavily against you, when claws and fangs press their advantage against your fragile body. The absence of visibility also robs you of resources. Where by day you might search for wood, food, or shelter, at night you are immobilized, forced into passivity. Any attempt to forage risks injury from unseen hazards, sharp stones, thorned plants, unstable ground. What by day was difficult becomes by night nearly impossible. Hunger gnaws louder as the hours stretch, but there is little you can do except endure the slow ticking of a darkness that feels unending. Even the fire, your fragile ally, is demanding. It requires constant feeding, yet venturing into the dark to gather wood is an act fraught with danger. Every step away from its circle of light feels like a step into a predator's waiting jaws. So you sit, torn between the dwindling flames and the risk of replenishment, caught in a trap of necessity that guarantees anxiety no matter which path you choose. The fire becomes not just a tool but a cruel test of endurance and decision-making under pressure. The physical toll of the night grows steadily heavier. Shivering muscles ache with fatigue, yet the body refuses to relax. Sleep, fragmented and shallow, leaves you weaker with each passing day. Exhaustion dulls your reactions, making you clumsier and slower when you most need clarity. In a world where danger does not pause for rest, your inability to recover properly at night becomes a liability that compounds until your stamina and judgment collapse entirely. Night also plays tricks with sound, carrying noises further than daylight hours would allow. A howl on a distant ridge might seem impossibly close, while the movements of small creatures are amplified into menacing disturbances. Without the ability to accurately interpret these signals, fear festers unchecked, sapping your resolve. Every hour stretches into eternity, marked not by clocks but by the shifting chorus of nocturnal life, a constant reminder of how little control you truly hold. The lack of reliable light sources also cripples any sense of orientation. Landmarks that by day guided your movements vanish into obscurity, replaced by an indistinguishable blackness. Should you be forced to move by predators, weather, or necessity, you do so blindly, with each step risking a fall, an injury, or worse. Getting lost is not just inconvenient, it can be fatal, severing your link to fire, tools, or the fragile safety of others. In the night, parasites thrive. Insects swarm toward body heat and the glow of fire, biting and stinging, their presence a constant irritation that interrupts any hope of recovery. In regions where disease-bearing pests dominate, each bite carries not just discomfort but potentially deadly consequences. You are reduced to swatting at unseen tormentors, your skin itching, your patience thinning, your exhaustion mounting. The small becomes monumental when magnified by the silence and darkness of the Stone Age night. For those who have only ever known modern sleep, the endless wakefulness of ancient nights would be unbearable. Without comfort, without closure, the hours grind on with a relentlessness that crushes spirits. The brain, deprived of proper rest, drifts into strange states of half-consciousness where dreams blur with reality. Hallucinations are not uncommon in extreme fatigue, and in the Stone Age, mistaking imagination for reality could be the last error you ever make. The psychological warfare of night deepens further in solitude. Alone, you are acutely aware of your fragility, every heartbeat loud in your chest, every breath shallow with anticipation of disaster. Even among a group, there is little relief, for trust is brittle and vigilance must be shared. If one companion falters, the group weakens. If disagreements spark, the fire of human conflict can flare as dangerously as any predator's approach. Night tests not only the individual but the bonds of community. Beyond predators, weather adds to the misery. Cold winds cut across exposed skin, carrying with them the scent of rain or snow. Without adequate shelter, you are at the mercy of the sky, your body trembling uncontrollably as hypothermia creeps closer. Moisture soaks crude bedding, extinguishes fire, and chills bones, reminding you that the night does not merely belong to animals but to the unforgiving elements themselves. Your senses, stretched to their limits, dull over time. Eyes strain fruitlessly against the dark until the mere act of looking becomes painful. Ears twitch at constant noise, creating a baseline of tension that never dissipates. Smell, perhaps the only sense sharpened by night, becomes overwhelming, the scent of soil, smoke, and fear mingling into a reminder of your vulnerability. The human body is not built for nocturnal dominance, and the night punishes this weakness mercilessly. As the hours crawl onward, your body's energy is spent not on rest but on vigilance. Muscles remain tense, ready to leap, fight, or flee, yet such readiness cannot be sustained indefinitely. When dawn finally approaches, the relief is bitter, your body is drained, your mind fogged, your chances of effective survival diminished. The cycle resets with each new dusk, grinding away at you until you are worn thin, a shell of what the day demanded. Night also magnifies hunger and thirst, the gnawing emptiness in your stomach louder in the stillness, the dryness of your throat harsher without distraction. You crave sustenance, yet none is available until light returns. In this way, night becomes a cruel companion, stretching your suffering while mocking your inability to act. Each pang of need cuts deeper into your endurance, making the coming day even harder to survive. The inability to plan properly under the cover of darkness compounds your disadvantage. Without sight, preparation is guesswork, your ability to anticipate needs crippled. Every resource must be rationed carefully, every movement reconsidered. Mistakes made at night often echo into the following day, leaving you perpetually one step behind in the unforgiving race of survival. Even the stars, while beautiful, offer little comfort. For those untrained, they are not maps but meaningless pinpricks. Mocking reminders of how far from mastery you are. Instead of guidance, they serve as markers of time's slow, punishing passage. You watch constellations shift, waiting for dawn, knowing only that each glittering point represents another hour of endurance. The soundscape of the night is its own torment. The hoot of owls, the calls of distant animals, the rustle of unseen movements, they form a chorus that underscores your helplessness. Silence is no reprieve either, for it carries the weight of anticipation, a vacuum in which fear expands unchecked. In either case, you are caught in a tension that prevents true rest, a constant readiness for dangers both real and imagined. Even in the rare case of calm, where predators are absent and the weather is kind, the psychological demand of remaining alert through the night erodes resolve. The very absence of event becomes oppressive, the stillness so deep it amplifies your own doubts. You begin to question your place, your ability, your endurance, spiraling into despair that eats at you from within. The night need not bring claws or fangs, it can defeat you with silence alone. Dawn eventually comes, but it is not triumph. The light reveals exhaustion, depleted resources, and the toll of unrelenting vigilance. Instead of renewal, it marks the beginning of another cycle where you must labor in a weakened state, ill-prepared for the challenges ahead. The night leaves its scars, subtle but cumulative, dragging you ever closer to collapse. In the Stone Age, surviving the day was only half the battle. The night, with its multiplying dangers and relentless psychological stress, was as much an adversary as any predator or storm. To endure even one requires strength beyond what most modern people could summon, and to repeat the ordeal night after night is to live in a reality where the very rhythm of existence conspires against you. Sleep in the Stone Age is not the gentle descent into dreams that modern beds and blankets allow, it is a fragile gamble against danger, discomfort, and the gnawing unrest of the mind. The ground beneath you is hard and unyielding, scattered with stones, roots, or damp patches that steal warmth and press sharply against your body. Without cushions or covers, every shift becomes a negotiation between pain and fatigue, leaving you only partially rested even when exhaustion finally forces your eyes closed. Rest becomes a fleeting visitor rather than a faithful companion. Even when you manage to drift into sleep, it comes in shallow bursts rather than deep, restorative cycles. The mind refuses to let go fully, ears alert for the crack of a branch, the growl of a predator, or the sudden silence that signals danger. Dreams dissolve quickly as the body remains trapped in half-awareness, never trusting its surroundings. Instead of replenishing you, these fractured intervals of sleep leave you groggy and irritable, a state that only worsens your chances of surviving the demands of the following day. The psychological weight of constant interruption grows heavier with each night. Anxiety accumulates, as your body associates rest with vulnerability. You become afraid to fall asleep at all, fearing that in those moments of stillness you might be ambushed or injured. This fear is not irrational. In the Stone Age, predators truly did take advantage of the night. Sleep deprivation turns into a vicious loop where fatigue heightens fear, and fear prevents the rest that fatigue desperately needs. Without reliable sleep, memory falters. The mind loses its ability to recall where resources lie, which paths are safe, and which plants are dangerous. Forgetting such details in a modern setting might mean inconvenience, but in the Stone Age, it could mean poisoning yourself, wandering into predator territory, or becoming separated from your group. The collapse of memory is not only a personal weakness but a fatal flaw in a world where knowledge meant survival. Judgment deteriorates quickly as sleep loss compounds. Choices that once seemed straightforward become clouded with doubt or reckless impulse. You might waste energy chasing a rabbit you cannot catch, or drink from a muddy stream without caution. Each poor decision chips away at your strength, and without a store of reserves to buffer against mistakes, one lapse in judgment can unravel days of hard work. Sleep-deprived minds do not reason, they react blindly. Emotion spirals in unpredictable directions. Irritability flares at companions, fraying fragile alliances that are necessary for survival. In moments of weakness, despair presses hard, convincing you that the struggle is pointless and that surrender would be easier than enduring another night of terror. Small frustrations that could have been endured in a rested state swell into insurmountable burdens. Anger, hopelessness, and paranoia bloom in the vacuum left by resilience. The body, too, betrays you under the burden of sleeplessness. Reaction times slow. Movements grow clumsy, and the ability to coordinate tool use or climbing falters. When predators or accidents strike, these fractions of delay make the difference between life and death. A stumble on uneven terrain, a dropped stone tool, or a sluggish dodge against a charging animal are all consequences of a body dulled by lack of rest. Fatigue becomes its own predator. Hallucinations creep in when deprivation stretches further, blurring the boundaries between dream and waking life. Shapes in the shadows take on monstrous forms. Voices whisper from the rustling leaves. Ghostly movements dart at the edge of vision, each one sparking panic in a mind too frayed to discern truth. The Stone Age is already hostile. To face it with a mind inventing threats makes survival all but impossible. Terror no longer requires an external trigger, it blossoms from within. The collapse of resilience also shatters rhythm, for the Stone Age required a harmony with daylight. Those unable to sleep at night often collapse into exhaustion during the day, wasting precious hours of light meant for hunting, foraging, or building. Productivity dwindles, and the group may lose patience with one who cannot carry their share. Sleep loss does not remain a private battle, it strains the collective balance, drawing hostility or abandonment from others. Your immune system falters without rest, leaving you vulnerable to sicknesses that the body might otherwise resist. A scratch festers more quickly, parasites breed unchecked, and weakness deepens as the body fails to repair itself. Sleep is not merely comfort, it is biology's mechanic, patching the cracks of wear and tear. When that mechanic is denied its work, the structure of survival collapses, leaving you open to every passing sickness and injury. Time itself becomes distorted in a haze of sleepless nights. Hours blur together, day bleeding into night without distinction. You forget how many sunsets have passed, how many mornings you have endured. Disorientation grows until even your sense of direction falters, making the task of navigating forests, rivers, or plains nearly impossible. Fatigue eats at your perception of reality, transforming the world into a blur where danger is harder to anticipate and respond to. Companionship, already fragile in such a harsh age, strains under the weight of fatigue-induced conflict. The one who cannot sleep becomes a burden on the group, snapping at others, forgetting responsibilities, or slowing down. Journeys. Trust erodes when mistakes mount, and resentment festers. A tired mind interprets criticism as attack, making cooperation nearly impossible. When community is all that stands between survival and failure, such breakdowns are catastrophic. The Stone Age demanded constant awareness of threats, yet sleeplessness dulls the very edge needed for vigilance. You might miss the subtle signs of a predator's approach, fail to hear the rush of a nearby river in flood, or overlook the shifting winds that signal a storm. Sleep loss blinds you to nature's warnings, making you prey not only to animals but to the environment itself. It erodes the very instincts required to adapt to such a world. The emotional collapse from exhaustion bleeds into hopelessness. As the days drag on without true rest, the thought of another night in the cold, haunted dark becomes unbearable. Many would simply stop trying, succumbing to despair long before their body gave out. Hope is as vital as food, water, or fire, yet sleep deprivation is ruthless in draining it away, leaving only the husk of a willpower that once fought to survive. Dreams, when they do arrive, are rarely gentle. They twist with anxiety and fear, dragging fragments of terror from waking life into night visions. Jolting awake, heart pounding, only deepens the exhaustion, as rest becomes tainted by nightmare. In such a world, there is no refuge in slumber, no guarantee that even unconsciousness will provide peace. The cycle of unrest becomes complete when both waking and dreaming are poisoned by dread. The mind's creativity, once vital for invention and adaptation, dries up without sleep. The problem-solving spark that could shape tools or devise traps dims into dull repetition. You lose the ability to imagine solutions, reverting to desperate improvisation that rarely succeeds. Without fresh insight, survival devolves into mere reaction, and reaction in such a brutal age is rarely enough. Sleep is the forge of ingenuity, and without it, progress halts. As days of deprivation mount, the very desire to eat or drink falters. The body rebels against its needs, suppressing appetite and dulling thirst. You may ignore hunger until weakness consumes you, or forget to sip from a stream until dehydration cripples your body. Instincts betray you when sleep is denied, as the systems designed to keep you alive collapse one by one. The failure is subtle at first, then swift and devastating. Paranoia takes hold, fueled by sleeplessness and the constant threat of predators. Companions are viewed with suspicion, shadows with certainty of malice. This paranoia corrodes alliances and cripples cooperation. The mind, overworked and deprived, convinces itself that safety can only be found in isolation, yet solitude in the Stone Age is a death sentence. Sleep loss does not merely harm the body, it sabotages the very bonds that make human survival possible. Night becomes an adversary feared more than the beasts themselves, for it is during those hours that exhaustion exacts its heaviest toll. The anticipation of failure to rest makes each sunset oppressive, draining morale before the dark even settles. This dread magnifies the collapse of resilience, ensuring that fear itself becomes another predator. To enter night already defeated in spirit is to guarantee defeat in body. The degradation of alertness increases the risk of accidents. A moment's inattention near a fire can cause burns. A stumble near a cliff can send you tumbling to your death. A misstep with a sharp tool can slice open skin that cannot be easily repaired. Where daylight demands skill, the fog of sleeplessness guarantees mistakes. The Stone Age does not forgive errors, and fatigue ensures they multiply. Compounded nights of unrest create a slow-motion collapse, where survival becomes impossible not because of one single threat, but because of the accumulation of many small failures. The body grows weaker, the mind duller, the spirit more hopeless, until all three unravel together. Death by sleeplessness is not dramatic but inevitable, the slow extinguishing of endurance in a world too harsh for fragility. Even the body's circadian rhythm rebels, unable to recalibrate to the chaos of broken nights. Without the natural cycle of light and darkness guiding restful sleep, you become increasingly out of sync with your environment. Hunters, foragers, and gatherers depend on rising with dawn and conserving energy at dusk, yet a broken rhythm leaves you vulnerable and misaligned, always stumbling when precision is needed most. Modern humans underestimate the true value of sleep because it is easily accessible in comfortable beds, but in the Stone Age, it was a treasure stolen nightly by fear, discomfort, and noise. That treasure, when denied, collapses every pillar of survival, leaving even the strongest unable to continue. The body's greatest resource, restoration, was never guaranteed, and its absence claimed countless lives before age or predators ever could. Each night without proper sleep compounds not linearly but exponentially. The more rest you lose, the less capable you are of regaining it, even if given the chance. The system spirals until no amount of stolen naps can recover the depth of exhaustion, leaving you locked in decline. Sleep is not optional, it is the very foundation of endurance, and without it, the Stone Age grinds you into surrender. The collapse of sleep and resilience is not a dramatic battle but a quiet undoing, an erosion of strength that robs you long before death arrives. It is the weakening of your grip on reality, the trembling of your hands on tools, the fog in your thoughts when decisions demand clarity. In the Stone Age, this collapse is as lethal as hunger or cold, a reminder that survival depends not only on food and shelter, but on the fragile sanctuary of the mind at rest. Small failures in the Stone Age are rarely isolated incidents, they ripple outward like cracks spreading across ice, each one weakening the structure of survival until it shatters completely. A single mistake, dropping a stone tool, spilling precious water, or letting a fire die, can appear minor in the moment. Yet each failure carries consequences that multiply, demanding more energy, more time, and more focus than you have left to give. Unlike in the modern world, there are no backup plans or second chances. Every lapse is magnified into a threat to existence itself. Consider fire. A flame left untended can vanish into smoke within minutes, and with it goes warmth, light, and safety. Rekindling it is not a simple flick of a switch but hours of struggle with damp wood, sparks that refuse to catch, and hands blistering with frustration. That delay leaves you cold, vulnerable to predators, and unable to cook food or purify water. One oversight, one moment of fatigue or distraction, cascades into a night of misery, illness, or even death. Hunting, too, suffers from these cascading failures. If a spear cracks during a throw, you lose not only the chance at a meal but the hours of labor it took to craft the weapon. Rebuilding costs time and energy you cannot spare, and each missed hunt means deeper hunger. Hunger, in turn, weakens your strength and clouds your judgment, making future hunts even less likely to succeed. The spiral accelerates until a single broken weapon dooms days of survival effort. Foraging mistakes are equally unforgiving. Confusing a toxic plant for an edible one may not kill instantly but can cause nausea, weakness, or hallucinations. That weakness prevents you from hunting effectively, defending against predators, or traveling to new resources. What began as one misidentification becomes a chain of vulnerabilities that predators, parasites, and exhaustion all exploit. In the Stone Age, the margin for error is razor thin, and each cut deepens the wound. Even social dynamics hinge on avoiding small failures. A careless word, a refusal to share food, or a misstep during group work can breed resentment in companions. Tension grows, alliances falter, and suddenly you are without protection or aid. A moment's lapse in patience may result in abandonment, leaving you alone against a wilderness that few survive solo. Social collapse is rarely sudden, it is the slow unraveling of trust, each thread pulled by tiny acts of neglect or selfishness. Water, often overlooked, is another source of cascading risk. If you drink without boiling, Thinking the stream looks clean, parasites or bacteria take root inside you. The illness weakens your body, which then struggles to gather food or wood, which in turn leaves you hungrier and colder. That weakness prevents you from moving quickly, increasing predator risk. A single sip, unexamined, can unravel every effort you've made to endure. Navigation errors show the same pattern. A wrong turn while gathering wood may cost you hours, which means less time for hunting or fire preparation. Lost, you expend more energy than planned, depleting strength and exposing yourself to unknown dangers. By the time you retrace your steps, daylight has waned, leaving you scrambling to prepare for night. That one mistake bleeds into every corner of your survival, each misstep sharpening the knife of failure. The body itself is fragile under this cascade. A stubbed toe, a minor cut, or a twisted ankle seems survivable alone, but each one reduces mobility and efficiency. Limping slows the group, demanding resources without contributing fully. Small wounds fester without medicine, turning trivial injuries into deadly infections. The chain of consequences is merciless. One slip on wet rocks can mean weeks of suffering, culminating in collapse. Sleep loss, too, magnifies every misstep. A tired mind forgets to feed the fire, misplaces tools, or ignores hunger pangs until too late. Each forgotten detail is a seed of failure, sprouting into larger problems. Sleep deprivation makes you clumsier, which leads to more injuries, which increase exhaustion, which further erodes judgment. The cascade is not only external but internal, an avalanche of your own body betraying you. Tool-making embodies this fragility. A cracked flake of stone or a poorly tied binding weakens the entire tool, yet you may not notice until the moment you need it most. When it breaks mid-hunt or mid-defense, you are left helpless. To rebuild costs time and energy already stretched thin. That failure multiplies into hunger, danger, and despair, eroding confidence in your ability to endure at all. Even weather magnifies minor mistakes. Forgetting to secure a shelter against wind may mean a night spent soaked and shivering, leading to sickness. Overlooking a shift in clouds can trap you in a storm without cover, destroying supplies or extinguishing fire. One lapse in awareness of the sky is not simply discomfort, it unravels every effort to preserve health and stability. Nature punishes forgetfulness with merciless efficiency. The emotional toll of small failures builds into collapse as well. Each mistake feeds frustration, which saps morale. Hopelessness grows until you begin to believe survival is impossible. That loss of willpower is perhaps the deadliest cascade, for once you stop fighting, every other weakness compounds unchecked. Survival requires not only strength and skill but belief in the possibility of endurance. One too many failures, however small, erodes that belief to nothing. Food preservation shows another unforgiving cascade. If meat is left too close to the fire, it spoils, wasting hours of hunting effort. If it is not protected from scavengers, it vanishes overnight. That loss forces additional hunts, demanding more energy from a body already tired. Each wasted scrap becomes not just hunger today, but weakness tomorrow, until the body fails from cumulative deprivation. Companionship can falter from overlooked responsibilities. Forgetting your turn to watch the fire, misplacing shared tools, or returning empty-handed from a foraging trip all mark you as unreliable. Others may withhold food or support, leaving you to fend for yourself. Isolation magnifies every other failure, stripping away the safety net of cooperation. The cascade of neglect leads not to a single mistake but to expulsion from community. Parasites thrive on small oversights. Forgetting to check bedding for insects or failing to clean wounds invites infestations that weaken the body. Fleas, lice, or worms may not kill directly, but they drain strength steadily, leaving you vulnerable to larger threats. That weakness slows you down, reduces hunting success, and increases mistakes. A few bites become a chain of decline ending in collapse. Each day in the Stone Age is a test of resource balance, and small miscalculations throw the system into chaos. Gathering too little wood means freezing at night, gathering too much drains energy needed for food. Eating too much at once leaves nothing for tomorrow, rationing too tightly leaves you weak today. Each imbalance, however slight, compounds into greater instability until survival becomes unsustainable. The fragility of human psychology amplifies these cascades. Knowing you have failed, even in small ways, weighs heavily in a world where there are no luxuries or buffers. The mind replays mistakes endlessly, turning them into looming shadows of doom. Confidence erodes, and with it, the creativity and courage required to recover. Small failures become not just physical challenges but psychological prisons that close tighter with each passing day. Animals exploit your smallest lapses. Leaving food unguarded for even an hour invites scavengers. A distracted moment at a riverbank may draw predators closer. Wildlife waits for your weakness, sensing opportunity in every oversight. The ecosystem does not forgive, it thrives on consuming what falters. One careless action signals to the wild that you are prey, and the cascade begins in earnest. Even weathered tools suffer from neglect. Failing to sharpen a stone edge makes cutting harder, consuming more energy and time. Overlooking a fraying rope binding causes sudden failure when weight is applied. Each ignored detail becomes a trap waiting to spring at the worst possible moment. Maintenance, constant and meticulous, is the only defense, and every skipped step guarantees eventual collapse. Children or weaker members of a group magnify the cascade. Failing to provide for them strains morale and weakens the whole. Their hunger or illness forces others to sacrifice resources, spreading thin the fragile balance. One oversight in caring for the vulnerable reverberates outward until the entire group is dragged toward collapse by cumulative strain. Small failures become magnified when shared among many. Your own body is a system of cascading fragility. Failing to drink enough water leads to dehydration, which reduces strength, which reduces hunting success, which increases hunger, which weakens the body further. Each step worsens the next until collapse is inevitable. What begins as a missed sip spirals into a death sentence. In the Stone Age, the body itself is the most unforgiving ledger of mistakes. Travel demonstrates the same unforgiving nature. Misjudging distance or carrying too little food turns a short journey into disaster. Hunger, fatigue, and exposure compound until you cannot return. A single step taken without caution can commit you to a chain of suffering from which you cannot escape. Each miscalculation bleeds into the next until you are stranded in collapse. The environment itself compounds failure. A lost tool left on the ground may be washed away by rain, buried by mud, or taken by scavengers. A fire left smoldering too near dry grass may spark disaster, consuming your shelter. What begins as an accident escalates into destruction that erases days of labor. The world waits for your mistakes, ready to magnify them into ruin. The group's collective failures intertwine, magnifying one another. One person's forgotten duty leaves others overburdened, making them more likely to err. The web of survival is tight, and one loose thread unravels the whole. A lapse by one can doom many, creating cascades not just of personal collapse but of entire communities. Recovery from these cascades is rarely possible, for each failure consumes the resources needed to repair it. A broken tool requires time you don't have. Lost food requires energy you cannot spare. Once the downward spiral begins, it accelerates beyond control, dragging you deeper into weakness. What begins small ends total, the collapse complete. In the Stone Age, collapse rarely came from one dramatic disaster. It came from the accumulation of small, mundane failures, each one a pebble added to the burden until the weight became unbearable. The tragedy is not sudden but incremental, the slow grinding down of resilience until nothing remains. Survival was not about avoiding catastrophe but about avoiding the countless tiny errors that built toward it.